Okay, today is August the 3rd. We will open our meeting with a moment of silence, followed by the third step prayer found on page 63 of the Big Book. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help with thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. On page 159 and 160 in the Big Book, it states, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. I'm Nicole. Welcome to the Sunday Big Book study for anyone and everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. We encourage everyone to participate in our meeting via video link if possible. Please mute your device. If you are phoning in, press *6. We are a step study which meets each week at this time. Our group is a spiritual entity having one primary purpose, that of carrying the message to the person who still suffers. This is our primary spiritual aim. Our group provides people with a place to learn about and work the steps. It has been our experience that working the steps consistently provides us with a better, saner life. The Big Book of AA is our textbook. Time and experience have proven it to be the most successful approach to the steps. Remember, what is shared in the meeting is private. Per traditions 1 and 12, please, who you see here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here. This includes no use of recording devices of any kind. A sponsor is anyone who has had a spiritual awakening as a result of working the steps and has the willingness to work with others. Near the end of the meeting, we will have sponsors announce themselves, their program affiliations, and their contact information. We will also have introductions of those new or returning to this meeting. And Lisa has volunteered to serve reading our foundation review today. Thanks, Lisa, for your service.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for your service. Foundation review. The purpose of this meeting is to study the Big Book of AA to help the alcoholic, sex addict, asinonic, drug addict, love addict, workaholic, OA, codependent, ACA, and others. All who suffer know what the problem is, what the solution is, and how to take the action that is necessary to recover from a hopeless state of mind and body to get from the problem to the solution. On page Roman numeral 13, it states, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. This tells us who authored the book, 100 men and women who recovered. They found a solution and passed on how they recovered. They all had the same problem, a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. They all recovered the same way, using the precise instructions in the Big Book. If we follow these directions with a recovered sponsor, we will recover too. Recovered is different from cured. If we go to the doctor with a broken arm and follow the doctor's instructions, we will recover, but we will still be breakable. Steps 1 through 9 get us recovered, and steps 10, 11, 12, worked each day, keep us that way. We are not cured, we are recovered. It goes on. We hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. In the 30s, they worked with rock bottom alcoholics, people who tried every other way to get better. They were desperate. When it was suggested there was a new way to recover, the 12 steps, they worked it like drowning people. This is what happened for us. We tried everything. Nothing worked. Our seemingly hopeless state brought us to our bottom and made us willing to take the necessary actions to recover. This is step 1. It also says we think this account of our experience will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. Alcoholics and the rest of us are not bad people. We are simply suffering. It continues. We are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. This program was created to help alcoholics. Quickly, they realized family members of alcoholics had this spiritual sickness and needed help. The steps worked for them too. Then drug addicts and overeaters realized they could adapt the program to recover. Seemingly hopeless people all over the world, like us, found they could work the 12 steps and recover too. Page Roman numeral 14 tells us what's required to be a member in a 12-step fellowship. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. What does that mean? We don't want to live like this anymore. No matter what we try, we're miserable. We can't get enough alcohol, drugs, selfish sexual behavior, food, money, prestige, things, stuff, approval, attention, devotion, control, etc. And we cannot stop trying to get someone or something on the outside to make us feel better on the inside. With enough pain, we come to a desire to stop living like this for good and all and begin practicing these principles in all our affairs. That's what's required for membership. We simply say, I want to stop. I can't live like this anymore. When the new member sees a person like them who has recovered, it gives them hope. And he or she asks for help. These are steps 2 and 3. The recovered person passes on these precise instructions. That's how it spread from Akron to New York City, over to Cleveland, and eventually around the world. Our purpose is to study the Big Book of AA in order to help all who suffer know what a spiritual malady is, what the solution is, and how to take the action that is necessary to recover from a hopeless state of mind and body, to get from the problem to the solution. Welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. Today our speaker meeting, and today's speaker is Dave from Oregon. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Dave. And Mark is going to introduce you, and I'll pass it over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Dave from Oregon. Dave's been in recovery for 13 years now. Started in AA in 2012, then SAA in 2014, and CODA a few years later. Both Dave and Tina are the founders of our primary purpose Big Book study meeting for all on Sundays and Wednesdays, this meeting. Dave also has been my sponsor since March 2022. And I've had the privilege of going through the steps with Dave and have been shown a new way of living the 12 steps each day. I've benefited a lot from Dave's experience and knowledge of recovery, and I am sure you will too. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dave.
Thank you, Mark. I'm Dave. I'm from Oregon today. Also spend a lot of time in Idaho during the year, so it might be Dave from Oregon, Dave from Idaho. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. I'm a sex addict. I am a codependent. Mark mentioned some of my sobriety, but my sobriety date to alcohol and drugs I identify as November 11th of 2012. Haven't had a drink or used a drug for the purpose of getting high of any kind since that date. My sobriety to what I'm going to call selfish sexual acting out, I date to February of 2014 when I worked the steps with a sponsor in the primary purpose way out of the Big Book for that disease, those symptoms, and have not acted out since. I'll just mention that codependency is a pretty tough one to identify a precise sobriety date for. Who doesn't have perhaps a codependent thought still? But as Mark mentioned, I have been participating in the fellowship of Codependents Anonymous for many, many years now. If we believe the opinion that Dr. William Silkworth wrote in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, addiction is a disease. It's not a set of bad habits. It's not a weak will. All of those things I just reviewed are not things that make me a bad person. This is a physical allergy. If you hear, it might be one that we share. I definitely have it. I'm going to call it the disease of addiction, and it's an allergy of the body combined with a craving of the mind, and I can't stop either one of those things. I can't stop the allergic reaction, and I cannot stop on my own power the craving. And that's what identifies me as someone who has this disease. What I'm going to do is share with you guys what living with that disease has been like for me. Speaker meetings are a little different. I'll actually get into the details of my life, and I'm going to share what happened towards the tail end of that addictive period of my life and what it is like for me now as a recovered addict. That's the basic outline that I'm trying to follow here. So what it was like. My symptoms kind of went in the reverse order of my recovery. I talk about this sometimes when I'm working with people. I had codependent symptoms first, selfish sexual acting out symptoms followed that, and drug and alcohol abuse followed that from an age standpoint. I recovered in the opposite order. Because it's pretty hard to recover from anything if you're still drinking and using drugs. So you recover from the thing that might kill you first, and then go on to other symptoms of your disease. So perhaps less than 10 years of age, I'm going to say. I definitely recall having symptoms, addicted to, craving. What I'm going to say is getting approval and attention from others, getting approval and attention from my parents, from coaches, from teachers, from the community surrounding me, from friends, from other people around me, from the kids in school, etc. I distinctly remember being in that place at a very, very early age. I participated in a heavily competitive environment. I didn't create it alone. It was within my family. It was within my community. It was within my school and athletic teams and so on and so forth. Many are familiar with these kinds of things, but my dad happened to be a teacher, a guidance counselor in the high school. He was a coach for the teams that I participated in swimming in particular. And so he was an authority figure. Competition was literally a value in the home that I grew up in. My mother had a home economics degree. She generally was a homemaker, although she did a lot of work in helping other people in various ways and in teaching. My family growing up was a member of the First Baptist Church in a small town in Minnesota. It was an evangelical Protestant church, and I will tell you that our entire moment of every aspect of our life revolved around that church and around being a part of that religion and that fellowship as I was growing up. That all started, I don't know how far back it goes, but what I have pictures of is my great-grandfather who immigrated to the United States from Czechoslovakia. I believe before the turn of the century, before 1900, and he became a very visible public Baptist minister on the streets of Chicago. He was, when I say visible, there are newspaper articles and pictures from the Chicago Tribune, which is not a minor newspaper, of my grandfather on the streets. And this is saved in a scrapbook. Our family still has those newspaper clippings, and you will see in a few minutes where the newspaper clipping habit takes us. I'll come back to that. My grandparents and parents continued with those deeply religious practices in the church, and it was never to be questioned whether my brothers and I would do that as well. We were in the church several days a week without fail on Sundays. It was really almost our entire life revolved around this. What I came to perceive was that my approval, my safety in being approved by my parents and by my family and by my church and by my community revolved around appearance and accomplishment. Didn't matter whether it was church, where it might be Sunday school or choir or a play of some kind, or those kinds of things, those kinds of activities. It might be academics in school, it might be athletics with sports teams, it might be music. I sang in the choir, I played in the band, I played in the jazz band, we did marching stuff. But every accomplishment was posted on the refrigerator, openly talked about at the dinner table in front of myself and my brothers as we sat. It was discussed with the visitors during family and social events. Dave, Carl's my brother, Glenn, did this, did that, accomplished this, accomplished that. What I learned from that is I had to do something right and be better than others in order to be okay, to be accepted, to be, I have the quotes around the word, loved, to feel any sense of being safe, meant to perform in a way that got the attention and the approval of the people in this small Midwest community in which I was raised. This is a very small town. Just an example of these perspectives. In school, I had very good grades in a class of 500 kids, but being the valedictorian out of 500 people and a National Merit Scholar wouldn't have met the standard. It wouldn't have been enough. In church, I sang in the choir, but I was not the brilliant soloist that my father was, that traveled to all the churches around the county and sang in solo competitions and so forth. In sports, where competition again was literally a value every day, I set 3 school records for my high school in a very large high school in a hugely competitive situation. But even being a state champion or going to the Olympics wouldn't have been enough, because Mark Spitz won 7 golds and I only won 5. I swear to you, that's how it would have been. Anything deemed an impressive accomplishment along the way was documented not only in that family scrapbook that I talk about, but also in the church bulletin, written, distributed to all the people, the local newspaper, published with headlines and pictures. These clippings were accumulated by Mother in a neatly annotated book sitting out on the coffee table for everybody to pick up and look at and read and talk about. This was, again, in addition to the church, what our life was centered around basically was competition and either winning or losing. I'll move on from that codependent way of living, dependent on other people, dependent on approval, dependent on attention, dependent on what happens, on circumstances, into the role of sex and sexual relationships for just a minute. My symptoms of addictively objectifying human bodies, looking at pornography, imagining what I could get from sex started in my early middle school years. I'm going to guess I was 13, 7th grade. I associated sex with approval. One thing that sex would do for me is I could substitute. I could imagine approval by imagining sex and imagining getting approved by the person that I was looking at. I substituted sex for intimacy. Just specific experiences. I was in a basement sleepover with several friends from the swim team in maybe 7th or 8th grade, and pornographic magazines were passed around and discussed for hours overnight. talking about getting approval, getting attention, getting sex. It was all wrapped up in one picture. The message was sex meant acceptance. I had another sleepover with friends. I was ridiculed in 7th grade for not yet having masturbated or not yet having had sex with someone else. Absolutely ridiculed for that by other men. Boys, really, boys, 13, 14. The message was sex meant you were a man. Sex meant acceptance. Sex, or even imagined sex, was also associated with winning. In what? In a competition with other men. Men competing with each other, with sex being the prize, with sex being the winning event, so to speak. I mentioned that alcohol and drug abuse started for me shortly thereafter. 9th grade, age 15. I've told this story to nodding heads previously in AA meetings. My first drink in the winter of my 15th year was a full pint of cherry sloe gin at a basketball game in 9th grade. In those first hours, after that first couple of drinks from that bottle, for the first time that I could ever remember since I was maybe 4, 5, 6 years old, there was an absence of the annoying self-consciousness, the horrible anxiety, the incredible empty lack that I felt inside of me. It was gone. It was gone for a bit. I didn't know it was possible not to feel that. I thought that's what living was lack and anxiety and scared. And then came the loss of control. I actually woke up the next morning in a hospital bed. There were charcoal stains on the gown I was wearing. There was an IV in my arm. I had no idea. I had a sore throat. I had a nasal gastric tube, maybe been intubated overnight because I almost died from drinking a straight up pint of cherry sloe gin after never having had alcohol before in my life. My parents were called back into the room, and you might think that with that start that alcohol would have scared me off. But I will tell you that by 10th grade, I was drinking heavily every weekend night, every Friday and Saturday. At that point, 10th grade, I also started smoking pot. By 11th grade, I was dealing marijuana to keep myself in pot without spending too much money. So I was spreading it to others. And by the time I was a freshman in college, I was using amphetamines, pot, partying and drinking heavily every weekend, dropping acid, and using and dealing cocaine every weekend. That little need for attention and approval started with things like church and sports. It spread to sex, and then it spread to partying, and then it spread to drugs, and it spread to alcohol, and it just doesn't stop. It's endless. And a culture of competition, perfectionism, performing permeated every aspect of my life at that stage in my early 20s. What I learned to value is how I looked to others on the outside. I was an object. What was inside of me was to be hidden and was to be suppressed because it didn't look good. Having found I couldn't get enough actual approval or support from others for just being me, I just continually sought out ways to get imagined or made up approval through the messages going on in my head. I went to college, worked my way into a job in healthcare and then a leadership role in that job in healthcare. Not surprisingly, I became a work addict. I would wake up early around 5 a.m., fretting, anxious, couldn't stop thinking, couldn't lay in bed anymore. I would get up and go into the hospital before 7 o'clock in the morning, and I most often worked 50+ hours a week for decades of my career. Didn't know what else to do with myself. AA founder Dr. Bob writes about this. My life centered mostly on doing what I wanted without regard for the rights, wishes, or privileges of anyone else. When interacting with colleagues at work, or with strangers for that matter, I would most often compete and compare in the conversation by finding a way to tell a more dramatic story, trying to find a way to look better. Because for me, it was either you looked better or you were worse. There was no in between. There was no equality. It was just, if I'm not better, then I'm worse than this person, whoever that person is. Could be even a complete stranger. If they shared their own experience, instead of being a listener and compassionate, I would try to beat them out with the more dramatic story, something that would get me more attention. I would stretch the truth and exaggerate if that's what was needed to win out in that kind of conversation. Instead of genuinely listening to others, expressing compassion or interest, I'd quickly interrupting conversations so that I could be the one to get the attention, to look impressive. I put quotes around look impressive, or so I thought. Anyone could see through me. Anyone who I was with would know. I'm sure they could feel it. I suspect most people could see right through my insecurity, and the big book on page 61 says this. It says, does he not make each of the people he's in conversation with, a relationship with, wish to retaliate and snatch all they can get out of the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? I carried on that practice of trying to look impressive on the outside. Again, that's in quotes, through my adult life. I not only used my own stories, I also used stories about my own children. There's 3 of them. I'll come back to that, but I am sure, and I know, having made amends to them, this has been very harmful to them. I gossiped just like my parents did about me. I bragged about them in front of other people, in front of them, just like my parents did with me. I carried that on without any self-awareness. Happened to be music-related stuff with my son, academics with my older daughter, sports-related stuff with my younger daughter, but it's all the same. It's all the same stuff. Passing on the harmful behavior. This is another way I imagined that I could look good to others now, was through my accomplishments of my children. Somehow, if they were to quote unquote look good, then I would look good. And of course, the advent of social media, now you've got Facebook or whatever social media tool, and now you've got an even larger audience with a bigger set of tools to work with on this front. Truth is, I was using my children as objects just as I had been used as an object when I was growing up as a child. And what was it for? To compensate for how bad I felt about myself. I hear the term enmeshed used some in our program, and this is where that term enmeshed starts to apply to the disease of addictive codependence and its associated behavior. We're so caught up in getting our way, of getting liked, getting what we want, getting either attention or loved or whatever it is. The selfishness, self-centeredness described in the big book, we make everything about us and how it's going to go for us, that we don't even see or treat others, even our own family members, as separate human beings. We're completely enmeshed with them. They're completely, they're only part of what we're getting, we're experiencing. They're not a separate human being, a separate individual from our experience. The Big Book of AA, again on page 61, in the third step instructions, talks about when we don't get our way, we feel angry, resentful, and we're sure others are more to blame. And I played that kind of victim, that kind of thinking, that kind of emotion going on within me, others are more to blame, through two marriages, a marriage of 10 years with 2 kids, second marriage of 14 years with 1 adopted child, both ended in divorce, with me remaining an unaddressed codependent, a closet sex addict, an alcoholic, a drug addict. Oh, but it was their fault. They were the ones who didn't do it right. As in my family of origin, I was always very careful. What I mean by this is my family was very careful, my mother, my father, my family, to look good to everybody else and make sure nothing looked bad. And I was always careful to try and do that too, to the outside world with my employment, with my activities, no matter how harmful my behavior was to others. And inside, I would play the victim. I had employee assistance program counselors. You might be familiar with that. When you're an employee at a big employer, you can go have free visits. There's no charge because the employer pays for it. Oh, he's having trouble with his relationship. Maybe this will help him be a better employee. So I go there, or to coworkers, or to friends. I'll put quote around friends, who were often very willing listeners to my gossip and about how I was a victim and about how it was her fault or his fault or their fault or the kid's fault or the parents' fault, everybody else's fault. And they listened because apparently they thought maybe bolstering my self-esteem was the role they were supposed to take. I will tell you that this just enabled me in my addiction and in my victim stance. Just in case you think counselors are the solution, I encourage you to watch for that, the enabling factor. My heavy drinking continued into my years of marriage that I just described, the raising of those 3 kids. I would, for example, take, Idaho's a big river rafting state. I would take these rafting trips with my friends in Idaho, and a case of beer per day per person, plus hard liquor to finish off the night, was typical on those trips. When at home, I'd wait until the rest of the family was in bed, and then I would go out to the garage and I would drink. Drink alone, reading books, tinkering around. Frankly, it was a very lonely, very miserable existence. So after my second divorce, I met my life partner. Most of you know Tina. She's here. 15 years ago, Tina and I met. We founded this meeting together. I entered our relationship as I had with my other relationships, to get approval from Tina. She was supposed to be the one, if she didn't approve of my behavior, then I didn't feel good about myself. I repeated all of my past patterns. And in my addictive, codependent, and meshed way, I made up that how I felt was her fault if I didn't feel like I wanted to feel. It was her fault for not taking emotional care of me. I wanted her to fix what really was decades of me feeling bad about myself, looking to the outside, looking to her, looking to others for approval, all while playing the victim as soon as it didn't feel right to me. So that's what it was like. Here's what happened. Tina had been participating in 12-step recovery programs for Al-Anon since long before I met her. And she did introduce me to the rooms of Al-Anon and ACA. In the case where we were a couple years into our relationship, I was very suspicious, I will tell you, of a spiritual solution. And that was much from my formative years of being raised in such a, I'll call it a disciplined church, fundamental religion. One of the reasons for that, I'll just say quickly, is because God, in the definition of my formative church, was up in heaven and out there somewhere and someday after death, and not here and not now and not present. And God was a judging God or an approving God, one way or the other, but not a friendly God by any means. So I was very suspicious of this spiritual solution thing. And I went to ACA and I went to Al-Anon meetings, a lot of them, because I saw myself as a victim that had participated in abusive marriages and abusive relationships. So I thought, oh yeah, I'm an Al-Anon or I'm an ACA. I've been in relationship with people who were abusive, but it didn't, number one, I didn't work the steps. I didn't get a sponsor. I didn't work the steps. And I didn't find a spiritual solution. So what happened in 2012? AA sobriety date. About fall of 2012, Tina and I happened to watch a movie. Not all movies have the same impact on us, but this movie, I highly recommend it if you ever want to watch a movie about addiction. The title is Flight. It stars Denzel Washington. It's about a pilot who saves an airplane and all the people on it from crashing. The only trouble is he was drinking at the time he was flying, and there was an investigation because of the almost crash after the flight. I could very clearly see myself in the dishonesty that is portrayed in that lead role by Denzel Washington, as well as his drinking. He lies about all the circumstances surrounding this flight. The movie portrayed AA, before it was done, as a solution for dishonesty, not just a solution for abusive drinking or abuse of alcohol. That was new to me. That was different. I'm like, wow, that program actually deals with dishonesty in your life, not just drinking and quitting drinking. And my own delusion and my own dishonesty was that I had not admitted my problem. I remember Tina and I talking about it after the movie. I decided at that point, there's a hallway in the church where the Al-Anon meetings are, and there happens to be a AA meeting on one side of the hall and Al-Anon meeting on the other side of the hall. And so I'll just say that the thought went through my mind, I'm on the wrong side of the hall. I said to Tina at that point, I think I'm an alcoholic. I went to my first AA meeting the next day. I worked this 12 steps in the subsequent months with the AA sponsor for the first time, and I stopped drinking. I even started to sponsor others, following instructions in the 12th step. But I will tell you that I was not emotionally sober. I was what you'd call a dry drunk for those first couple of years, maybe 18 months. A few months after finishing the steps, and by the way, the steps in that process with that AA sponsor probably took 14, 15 months to complete because of the protracted 4th step process that was used. A few months later, I expressed concern to my AA sponsor. I'd been with him now for that length of time, maybe 15 months, about potentially addiction to selfish sexual behavior. I was admitting this to him. And his response was he minimized it. I distinctly remember him saying, "Dave, every guy does that." Kind of shook his head. Every guy does what? Every guy objectifies women, looks at porn once in a while, et cetera, et cetera. Every guy, he says. Well, number one, I don't care if it's every guy. I'm the one who's miserable. And number two, apparently you aren't going to be able to help me with this. I'm going to read a quote real quick from the big book because it applies so directly to this transition and this situation for me. Page 18. There's a whole paragraph in italics there. I'll use the word addict. But the ex-problem addict who has found this solution and who is properly armed with facts about himself can generally win the entire confidence of another addict in just a few hours. And until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. The reason I reread that is, folks, if you're looking for a sponsor and it's a different fellowship from the one you might happen to be participating in, make sure the sponsor shares the problem with you. Make sure they own it, they admit it, that they've worked the steps for that problem specifically, and that they have a solution. The sponsor's got to share the same problem in order to be helpful, I think, to a protege. In my experience, as I described earlier, addicted men compete with each other. They compete with other men to be the object of women's attention, and they seek imagined approval from women through their sexual objectification. That's the problem. If they don't share that, if they don't see it, they don't own it, it's going to be really hard to help somebody. This is a root of the disease of sex addiction, and I sought out help. I went to the program of SAA, and I started attending local meetings, but to be honest with you, in Boise, Idaho, I could not find one person in all the meetings I attended who claimed to be a sponsor in the program of SAA. So I called the International Service Office of SAA down in Houston, Texas, and I was ultimately introduced to a man through that venue who attended the primary purpose group of SAA, saapp.org. There's 14 meetings a week available by telephone, that group. First time I remember hearing the words primary purpose, by the way, back in 2014, other than as read in the Tradition 5 readings. This was the first time. He became my SAA sponsor. He was also a recovered alcoholic. That helped. He understood codependence. He spoke the language. That helped. He understood codependence as the root of the disease of addiction, for drinking, for selfish sex, for all of it. He wasn't confused about this. He didn't minimize this. He was certain about it. In less than a month, between 3 and 4 weeks, we worked this 12 steps with me for sex addiction out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is the process I use to this day if someone asks me for help. I finally got honest about the real underlying problem of my addiction, seeking attention and approval of others, making up stuff in my head. The big book, by the way, calls this playing God. Making up stuff about what other people might be thinking, doing, what they really meant, what they haven't said, etc. Trying to get things to go my way in circumstances, in relationships, and blaming others if I didn't. This was my root. I had developed reliance on getting my way instead of seeing the truth. The only solution is a reliance on my higher power and on what's actually real rather than what's going on in my head. Listening to the getting and the wanting thoughts constantly running there in self-talk. Working the steps of my sponsor, I made verbal amends to my exes, my family, to my friends for trying to get my way in their life. I followed the instructions for the 12th step. And I tried to live those amends and apply myself to the primary purpose of recovery, serving as a sponsor to others, carrying the message of the 12 steps to alcoholics, to sex addicts, and to codependents. By taking the actions outlined in the Big Book of AA to practice reliance on what I call reality, I consider that a synonym for the word God. It's all the same. Reality, the universe, the truth, God, here, now, these are all the same thing to me. Instead of reliance on my thoughts, which are not mostly related to reality at all. My experience of living has transformed for the better. I feel like I own my presence. You could call it having my own 2 feet placed on the ground rather than blowing in the breeze with what I make up that other people think of me. I have become more free of the constant anxiety associated with trying to please others, get attention, find a hit, find a high, whether it be through alcohol, drugs, parties, or sex, or winning in any kind of imagined competition. And in the last minutes that I have here, I want to talk about what it's like now. I'm going to say most of my anxiety and fear has been removed. I can't say all, but it's not human not to feel fear any more than it's not human not to feel anger or irritation or resentment. These are human feelings. To say we're completely absent of those things would be to what? Be a zombie or not alive anymore. But I feel a conscious serenity with being present in the world, and with freedom from addictive behavior and the distractions of my mind. Reality has placed me in a position to be helpful and useful to others who are struggling with addiction. God's made good use of this misery I created for myself and for others around me all those years. How? As a tool to get me connected with other addicts, as was described on page 18 in the Big Book. It's a miracle that God would use all that crap, all that misery, all that ugliness as a positive, helpful, useful tool to carry the message and to work the steps together. I can honor and reveal what is on the inside of me without such concern for accomplishments and attention and approval and competition and what looks good, so to speak. Again, quotes. The Big Book of AA talks about a 4th dimension of which we couldn't have even dreamed. And there's lots of promises sprinkled throughout the book, especially 3rd step, 9th step, 10th step, the promise of sobriety itself, 12th step, the promise of being connected with others. However, I will remind us, the book also states in the chapters 2 wives and the family afterward, kind of getting back to real living, that all will not be fair weather, and it isn't any more in my life than it is in yours. But I approach it in a different way than I would have more than 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I would have used, numbed, departed, etc. The life God, the life that reality has given me as a recovered addict, is better than anything I really could have imagined prior to getting into recovery. My relationships with partner and family have improved. I am in a much better place financially. I have relationships and a life to be grateful for. It would be a fantasy to say that my life's without any challenges or any problems, but that would not be life, would it? The biggest challenge for me, the biggest change for me has been a reliance on higher power and turning to the actions to be helpful and useful to others who are still suffering. This is giving, instead of trying to get my way by imagining how I can look good on the outside. All those words, approval, attention, pleasing, impressiveness, etc. I frequently turn away from listening to my own head talk to me, or think, as the word we use is. Basically, I'm constantly talking silently to myself, but listening to that is playing God. Listening to my thoughts talk to me is playing God. What that often looks like internally is having a conversation with someone else who isn't even there. As I'm walking down the street or driving, or I'm talking to somebody. Maybe I'm talking to a counselor. They're not in the car, they're not in the room, but I'm talking to them. Something like that. My first turn towards a new action is to start talking to God, treating God as if God is real, present, current, right here, right now. And then turn my thinking to being helpful and useful to others. It's the action of giving that puts this solution into flow. And it's the flow that in turn gives me a power I did not have, power I was lacking. Just as promised in the 10th step instructions on page 85, these actions place me in a position of neutrality, safe and protected, provide me with the power to carry God's will out for my life. And in the 3rd step instructions, page 63, it says, God will provide us everything we need. I don't have to worry about that anymore. If we keep close to him and perform his work well. And you know that perform his work well statement, it sounds like it could be complicated, but I really associate it with 3 simple words. First is honest or truthful. The second is considerate, that others are involved in any conversation or situation. And the third is helpful. Honest, considerate, helpful. From a practical use of time standpoint, I attend our big book study meetings like this one each week. I provide service to meetings regularly, just volunteer for things, contribute to comments on the instructions when they're read, share my contact information at the end of each meeting. I get back to anyone who asks for help, try to carry the message. For more than 10 years, I've mostly constantly been serving in a sponsor role to multiple men at any given point in time. I haven't kept track. I suppose maybe I've sponsored a couple hundred men in 10 years. Doesn't matter. It's not a competition. That's only because God has brought them to ask for help. My nephew, a youth counselor actually at about age 30, recently asked me, he was having a conversation about my alcoholic recovery and such. And he said, how long, Dave, do these sponsor relationships last? And I said, I don't know. I recently spoke to the first guy I ever sponsored. We're still in touch. That was in 2013. So the longest relationship's 12 years. They don't all last anywhere near that long. It varies greatly. I suggest to everyone I work with to work 12 steps in less than a month, because we need to promptly get to the solution and be able to carry the message to others. Beyond that initial month, assuming all instructions are followed, then a 10th step relationship may continue, and it's God's will as to what takes place. If it continues or if I lose touch with those who have worked with me, I know many men who continue to participate in recovery and carry the message to others, this message to others years later, even though we've lost frequent contact. And I'm so, so grateful to the writers of the big book, to those who influenced those writers, such as Carl Jung and Emmett Fox and the Oxford group. This preceded the writing of the big book. I'm grateful to Joe McHugh and his partner Charlie, who traveled our country doing 12-step workshops in the early 90s and beyond to create the primary purpose renaissance in AA and in other fellowships. It got to SAA, obviously, eventually to OA, eventually now it's getting to CODA. That came at a time when the success rate for recovery had dropped dramatically. I'm grateful to the primary purpose groups out of Dallas, Texas, and other states like Florida for bringing big book study meetings into the modern era. Telephone meetings, video conference calls, Zoom meetings, worldwide now. I'm grateful to my sponsors, both my AA sponsor and my SAA sponsor. Call him an AA, SAA CODA sponsor because that's the language we spoke. I'm grateful to Tina for having the passion and taking the action to start several primary purpose fellowships worldwide, including this one that we are sharing together today. And I'm grateful for all of you for your participation in recovery from our shared disease and for patiently listening to me today. Nicole, back to you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Dave. Would you be willing, after we close, to stick around for questions?
Of course, yes, I would.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and close the meeting and then we'll continue on in fellowship. Could I please get someone to read the short form of the traditions on page 562?
I can do that, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie.
2 seconds. Five, 6, 2. One, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on AA unity. 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscious. Our leaders are not our trusted servants, they do not govern. 3, the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. 4, each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other group or AA as a whole. 5, each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. 6, an AA group of never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problem of money, property, and prestige diverts us from our primary purpose. 7, every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contribution. 8, Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service center may employ special workers. 9, AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service board or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues, hence the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. 11, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and film. 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our tradition, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. From page 100, it states, both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. To contribute to our meeting, please visit primarypurposebigbookstudy.com and click on the 7th Tradition link. Consider contributing $1 or $2 per meeting. In this way, we are fully self-supporting. The money pays our Zoom rent and carries this message to those still suffering. Now we would like to have all recovered sponsors please unmute your line and announce your name, program affiliations, phone number, and time zone. I'll get us everyone. We'll have a moment of silence for those who still suffer and close with the 7th step prayer, which can be found on page 76. And you're welcome to unmute and join in if you like. My Creator, I am now willing
now
that
willing
you
that you should have all of me, good and bad.
pray that you now
Pray and now
remove
remove from me every single defect of character
Pray
that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows.
strength
Grant me strength
here.
as I go out from here
to
to do your bidding.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, now it's time for fellowship and opening up the floor for questions or comments for Dave and his story. And I'll pass it to you, Dave. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Nicole. And I don't have anything else to share, but I am open to any questions.
Well, Dave, this is Nicole. I wanted to ask if you had any thoughts, anything that just comes to the top of mind about what you've learned over the years in the practice of helping others.
Wow.
No, it's a big topic, but
It is a big topic. What have I learned? One of the things I have learned is to start by sharing a resonance with the problem and not trying to get into the solution too quickly. Not trying to make any promises about how things are going to get better or really strongly emphasize the whole God feature of things right at the start, but rather, just ask some questions and listen. What got you here? What's your experience been like? And as they start to share, those details, which usually people don't show up in the rooms of recovery if things are going great. Typically, when they first get here, things are troublesome for various different reasons. Then to start by resonating with them and sharing some of my own experiences about the difficulty, the trouble, the pain, the suffering, because that's where they're going to connect. That's what's going to sound familiar to them. It's not going to sound familiar. Oh, everything's all better now. You just have to change your perspective and get some work in, and those kind of things. It's like, wow, yeah, it sucks, doesn't it? It's really horrible, and it was really horrible for me. So starting there. The second is not getting into a yet another codependent relationship with people whom I'm working with. And that's not easy for me because that's who I am. That's where I came from. How can I please them? Don't hurt their feelings. Make sure that I'm taking care of their, at least I imagine, may not be the case, that I'm taking care of their issues or whatever. Be really specific with my instructions. Hold on to expectations. If they don't show up for a meeting, don't teach them how to treat me by, saying, oh, that's okay, that's fine. I know you're going through a lot right now. Those kinds of things. I mean, yeah, I know that they're looking for support. I get that. On the other hand, this is a new way of life and a new way of living. And particularly for codependents, it's something that I think it's important for a sponsor to model. Model the new way of life. Model the new way of living as we go forward. So be direct, be honest, be clear to the extent that I can be about, what I am looking for in this sponsor-sponsee relationship, what I expect, et cetera, et cetera. Some will say, oh, that's too rough or too rigid, or, that's too big book thumper, or, I hear these terms applied. But the truth is, I think that those who are really suffering need to hear exactly what it is that they need to do. And so I needed that. I know I needed that from my sponsor, and I know that helped me when my sponsor did that. That's what I try and bring, is because that's what my sponsor brought, and that's what helped me. If that doesn't help the next person, maybe they have a different solution, or maybe something else will work better for them. And that's okay too. If it works for them, that's great. But that's my answer to that question. Thanks.
thank you.
Hi, Dave. This is Melinda. I would like to speak.
Yeah, hi, Melinda.
Hi. You said you would take questions. Will you also take appreciations?
Yes, although questions would be best if you have one, just because we're on a recording, and I think that's the most helpful. But it's
Oh.
absolutely fine to say a quick appreciation, maybe is what I could say.
All righty. I related to keeping up appearances for sure, but your monumental honesty, my heart just flew open. You really modeled honesty, and boy, does it feel good to be on the receiving end of honesty. My question, you talked about perform his work well. You talked about what you do. Would you give some more examples for the newcomer of performing his work well that maybe, a beginning sponsor or a beginning person in this program would not really necessarily think of, oh yeah, that's performing higher powers will well.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. It's a lot simpler than I once thought it was. It isn't just about helping other addicts. I know that that's a huge emphasis in the 12th step and in the program, but perform God's work well is being helpful and useful in all circumstances of our life all day long. Is something as simple as, instead of walking down the street obsessing about my own thinking, actually notice that there's a person walking towards me and make eye contact and wave or smile or something. Pick up a piece of trash that's laying on the sidewalk instead of just obsessing right on by it. Holding the door open for the person walking in behind instead of, not even being aware they're present and letting it hit them in the face. There's so many examples of perform God's work well as God would have us be in this world. It gets down always to those three categories. I said honest, considerate, and useful. And considerate is the pick up trash, hold the door open, or be patient in the grocery line kind of thing. But see, this is a different way of life. See, everything prior in addiction, in active addiction, was about me, about what I could get, about getting high, about getting something to make me feel better, about how you were affecting me, et cetera, et cetera. And this is about how would God have me be in this world and in this planet. And it's not as complicated as I once made up. See, I thought that meant I had to choose all the right words and say them in the right way and say them at the right time and make the plan and have the plan all prepared so that it would go just the way I wanted it to, say in a conversation that's coming up with somebody or at work or with a child or, those kind of things. That's not it. It's be honest about who I am and what I'm thinking, and then be considerate of what the other person's bringing and experiencing. And then, is there any way to be helpful and useful in this situation? And I know this sounds simple and it sounds easy. I will tell you that the practice of it is intense and not, I wouldn't use the word easy. It's simple, but it's not easy, and it requires a lot of practice. Thanks for your question.
Hey, Dave, so it's Sheila. So you had shared when we were in the Working with Others chapter, I loved a lot of the things you were pulling out. And so how it talks about when we're in that initial meeting with somebody and kind of hands off, right? If somebody's ready to go, we're ready to go with them. If not, it's again, just very hands off. Do you carry forward that same hands-off component as you are working with somebody? That is, if you get further along, let's say you're getting to amends and giving somebody direction on amends and they're not following, or somebody isn't following direction. How do you handle that then? What are your thoughts?
Oh, those who have worked with me would say, Dave will actually edit the amends and tell me what to say. I do that. I do that because I can be in a position, particularly with amends is a good example. I'm not emotionally engaged and involved in whatever situation it is. And so I can take an objective perspective. I can also take the experience of what I think might be harmful I can see where they're going off track. Once I've been working with the guy, especially after we've gotten through what I would call the 3rd step instructions and into the 4th step, I try to be very direct, very instructive, all the way to the point of, I don't think I would say it that way, I would say it this way, or I wouldn't choose that, I would choose this. Pass.
And Dave, if somebody doesn't follow those instructions?
Well, that's up to them and their higher power.
Sure.
Now, the one thing I kind of alluded to this is we teach people how to treat us, and we teach people how to treat us as sponsors. So where I would, I'll be honest, where I would drop somebody is if they are in any way being manipulative or playing around with me. If they make appointments and don't show up, I don't participate with that. If they want to just call and have conversation, which is basically gossiping about other people and just chat, I don't do that kind of sponsorship. If, you know, past taking the initial instructions, I'm asking them for a 10th step, not a coffee chat. I want a 10th step. You know, I'm happy to take calls and have conversations as long as it's framed in the process of doing a 10th step, for example. So yeah, it's again, as a codependent, I do not want to be a codependent in these sponsor relationships. And actually, it's one of the very best places to practice not doing that. Because if I'm doing it with my sponsees, I'm probably going to be doing it with my kids, and my partner, and my family, and everybody else. Pass.
Thanks, Dave.
Hi, it's Faye. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you bet.
First of all, thank you for sharing your experience, strength, and all. They say that the points don't roll over from one program to the other. So I'm wondering if it's the same core issue, that there's a spiritual condition. Why don't they roll over if it's the same 12 steps that you do?
The problem, I think that selfishness, self-centeredness, codependence, in a word, there's lots of adjectives that can be applied to it, is the root of all addictions. I absolutely agree with you about that. My sponsor would agree with you about that. The problem is in that phase of getting here and suffering with a specific problem, whether it be overeating or whether it be selfish sexual acting out or whether it be drinking or drug use or codependent in a relationship, is if the sponsor does not share the experience of having the desperate level of problem that the person who's trying to recover also has, I don't think the connection gets made. I think page 18 describes that really well. I can't do better than the words that are written there. And that is that the ex-problem codependent or ex-problem overeater or ex-problem drug addict is and who has found a solution and is properly armed with facts about himself. That means they have had all the problems of overeating. They have had all the problems and suffering and misery that come from selfish sexual acting out. They have had all the problems with cocaine abuse or whatever it happens to be. It says then they can win the entire confidence of the other addict in a few hours. But until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So that's why I just strongly encourage someone to seek out a sponsor who shares the same problem. And that's the best I can say about that.
Hi, Dave. This is Kashi in Florida. I have a question.
Hi, Kashi.
Thank you so much for your service. Do you ever skip days to avoid a 10-step or an 11-step because you don't want to deal with it? Or do you ever make a 10-step or an 11-step negotiable?
Boy, I'm not sure what negotiable means. You mean like
whether you're gonna do it on a daily basis or not?
Oh, I don't do anything on a rigid time frame like daily. You know, the 11 steps important. I used to do daily stuff maybe back in the oh, I don't know how long it was, first couple of years. But I don't do those kinds of design for living things on a rigidly scheduled basis. I don't know that I can say that that's good or bad. It's just not what I do. And I think what you're also alluding to is rationalizing whether you need to do one or don't need to do one. I probably am guilty of that, like anyone. Pass.
Thank you.
Hello, this is Nicole. I had a question.
Hi, Nicole.
You talked about when you're having those conversations with yourself and it's like you're talking to someone else. Can you kind of specifically, what would you do in the moment when you catch yourself doing that?
That's a good question. And I will own that very often I let it go too long. After 10 years of practice, I still let it go too long. But the biggest turning point for me is away from listening to my head talk to me, which I associate with playing God as if the thinker is God. The ego that's doing the talking is, in fact, what I'm treating as God. Okay. And turning to actual God. Now, if God is up there, out there in heaven somewhere, this isn't really all that helpful, but I don't perceive God that way. I perceive God as a current, living, immediate, right now presence that's within my cells, within my soul, within my body, right here. So now I'm turning and I'm talking to God as if God is here. God is now. God is present. I'll tell you where that comes from partly is many years ago, I was taking a walk on a trail in Boise, Idaho, and I'd been thinking, I don't know, for 20 or 30 minutes, just thinking about a particular situation and issue. And I happened to come upon a AA group member who was back there. There was nobody else back there except him and me and one other guy. This is in 30 minutes of wilderness in the car, from the car. Happened to run into him and they asked me how it's going. And I said, oh, not very good. I've been in a bad place since I started my walk. And he looked at me and he said, are you talking to God? And it just somehow woke me up. No, I hadn't once even considered the thought of talking to God in 30 minutes of walking and hiking. That's the turn. That is the turn. And then the next turn is instead of thinking about, woe is me, victim, bad situation, bad circumstance, don't like how I'm feeling, I don't feel good about myself, whatever that is, because that's what's going on in my head. I'm turning to how might I be helpful and useful to other people in any way? Oh, I still need to get back to email from a sponsee. I still need to make a call to a family member that I haven't yet. I still could be doing this. I still could be doing that. Now my thinking is in a completely different place. Or I might turn my thinking to gratitude and start thinking about, oh, you know, I'm really, really grateful, even for just these trees that I'm walking in most immediately. But then I'm grateful that I'm still alive, that I'm still breathing. I'm grateful for what? Family or this or that or the other thing. And so turning to useful and turning to grateful from this hopeless place of whatever my mind is spewing. That is a huge, huge turn. And that's how I would describe it.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Tina, you got your hand up?
Yeah, you kind of answered it, but my question was going to be, and maybe you could elaborate more on it. You talk often about listening to my head talk to me, and I'm just wondering what is that?
Yeah. So that is as if there's some place within me. I think that Carl Jung and many, many others called it ego, whatever that is. Chuck C called it that as well. That literally talks to me as if it's a third person or a second person. And the language is English, it's English words. It's talking, 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 which really is thinking, thinking, thinking. But it's like there's two different aspects involved. And I know you might think I'm insane when I say this. Maybe I'm schizophrenic or a split personality or I don't know what. But it's the ego's presence within my head that's just story, 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 talking, 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 talking all the time. And I've heard people in AA meeting call it the committee, and I hear all kinds of different references to it. But it's me, whatever aspect of me is ego, talking to me, whatever aspect of me is the self-awareness that I'm more than just that. I'm
Can you
more
give
than
an
just the brain.
example? Can you give an
Oh
example?
gosh. Well, examples always require a specific subject. So I'm just going to make up one fiction-wise. So right now, you and I talked yesterday that my daughter, name's Kelsey, is going to be moving soon. I'm actually not quite sure whether she moved this weekend or not. And I'm making up, this voice in my head is telling me that I'm not doing enough for her and that she might be thinking poorly about me. And then it's the kick in, I'm feeling bad about myself because I'm not helping her more with this move and with this situation. Maybe she needs help to move the stuff out of the car into her new place or whatever, which happens to be closer to Oregon than Idaho, etc. So that's an example of the voice talking to me. Now, if I would just quit listening to the voice and start asking God what I could do, maybe I could text her and ask her how it's going and just touch base with her without also getting into an enmeshed situation where I'm doing more than I should be because she hasn't asked for help. She could have asked for help. She hasn't. So I have to be careful about what's the right next action versus what's codependently enmeshed next action. But that's an example of a subject which my head is talking to me about right now. And you could pick the next subject for the next half hour and the next subject for the next half hour, but it's there, it's there, it's there, pretty much continuously, unless I make that turn and start talking to God and start thinking about how I can be helpful. And by the way, it has to happen again next half hour and again the next half hour. So it's not a once per day. It's a frequently all day long kind of deal. That was a great question. Thanks.
Hi, Dave. This is Jacqueline. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was really impactful. I was wondering, at one point during your story, you shared, you said the word friends in quotes. And I'm wondering how your non-recovery friendships or relationships evolved after you stepped into recovery, how those relationships
Yeah, thanks, Jacqueline. I said friends in quotes because I don't think a friend that participates in listening to gossip is actually a good friend. I think a good friend would say, aren't we gossiping about somebody else right now, you know, but people don't tend to do that. I mostly have stopped gossiping about other family members or other people when I'm out for coffee with friends. We'll talk about ourselves, and we may talk about such broad topics as, I don't know, politics, religion, work stuff, and those kind of things, but not get down into, you know, that person, he hasn't been doing much lately, has he? You know, kind of gossip, particularly critical gossip. I don't participate in it anymore because I want to be a friend. I don't want to be the friend in quotes, if I can, if I have enough self-awareness to do that. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Dave, I had a follow-up to that.
Sure.
Yeah, so yeah, as far as like the gossip, I'm wondering how you went about sort of conversations when people that you've been in a relationship for a long time, and as you said, they're not in recovery, and then they begin to gossip and speak poorly of other people, and you know, say, what do you think? Or, you know, try to engage you somewhere, you know, or, you know, or looking at you like, come on, you know, respond to this. How do you respond to that? How do you avoid or, you know, turn from partaking in the gossip?
Well, I do remember often in the early part of my recovery saying to my colleagues, for example, because here's the thing, it was really tricky. We were all managers of people, and thus there was this sort of shady line between needing to talk about other people because we needed to take an action and make a mutual decision versus purely gossiping about other people. And I recall back then saying directly to them, you know, we're talking about another person when they're not here in the room. And this that we're talking about is not necessary to make a decision about an action we should take. So let's stop and move on to a different subject. I was that direct. Was it uncomfortable? Hell yeah. Because I'd been participating in the other way of doing it with these same people. Some of them for, they'll tell you, 25 years I had been working with them. And now suddenly I'm a different person that they've known for 25 years. And yeah, that was very uncomfortable. I didn't want to ruin those relationships, you know, so to speak. But I recall, I know that if you talk to this one particular colleague, I can think of two or three, that she would probably remember those times, you know. It got uncomfortable between us because Dave wouldn't do it anymore, kind of thing. I think she would probably have a memory of that. Anyway, pass.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your story. It was wonderful. Appreciated it.
Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Hi, Dave. It's Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I can't be on camera right now. And I also, my audio cut out a moment ago, so I did not hear the last part of what you said. But my question springboards on this topic at hand. So those you referred to people who would, during your share, try to bolster your self-esteem, who would, you know, you would dump problem and they would, this is my interpretation, I don't remember exactly how you said it, they would kind of do a poor youth enable. You said to watch out for this with counselors. So I think about that differently than I do gossiping. And I think about that more myself as like enabling. And I'm wondering how you have approached, if you also experience it as a different thing than gossiping, how you have repaired, or how do you choose to be in relationships with those people where you may have invited them to, to participate in those ways, and you now feel differently about it?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is don't repeat the dynamic from my side. If they were to bring enabling or gossip, whichever you want to call it, if they were to bring talking about a third party when they aren't there in, then it goes to that I need to be brave enough, have enough courage to communicate to them, I am not willing to participate in this anymore. And I think that'd be the way to say it. I'm just not willing to participate in this anymore. But I think the most important thing is for me to not bring it to begin with, and not be the enabler. So, if one of my children, for example, were to start gossiping about somebody else, or one of my family members, or one of my friends, that I not be an enabler with them, especially when I'm codependently sitting there thinking, oh, but you know what they're really looking for is support from me. They're looking for somebody to be kind at this point, and somebody to be a friend at this point, and someone they can vent to at this point, and someone they can, talk to at this point. And, you can see my sort of attitude about that, because it's so easy as a codependent to use that as a justification, or as an excuse, or as to go ahead and continue to participate. But unfortunately, that continues to enable. What does it do? It enables them to continue to play victim. When they're judging and being critical and talking about how it's affecting them and so on and so forth. So, the only thing that we really can do is live this new way of life by example. And does that, since we've been codependents all our lives, does that make some relationships that we've had for very long periods of time uncomfortable, because it's now a new dynamic in a new way, and no longer are you being my support, or those kind of things? Well, yeah, unfortunately, yes. But was that healthy? And was that a good, positive, constructive, genuine friendship, or was it just sort of imaginary connection around mutual criticism and judgment of other people? Because I can tell you that kind of connection, in my opinion, is imaginary. It's not real. It's not actual. It's not really intimate. It's a shared victimhood, a shared blaming, a shared, yes, aren't we all victims to this stuff? And you can see, if you read pages 61 to 63 in the big book, where that takes us. And I don't want to be a person living in 61 to 63 anymore. I want to be a person who is genuinely trying to recover from that discomfort and all.
Thanks so
And by
much.
the way, I just want to say one more thing. So it's uncomfortable, and what gives us the courage to bring what's new, as uncomfortable and even painful as it might be? And the big book says it's faith that gives us the courage to do that. Not some kind of, figure out how the right way is to say it, or anything like that. It says it's faith, that it's the right thing to do, and it will bring good things. It may not bring good things in this moment, just like I want them, but might I have a better relationship with my daughter over the years because of what I'm bringing now that's uncomfortable? Well, I can tell you that for me and my daughter, that has happened. That has been my experience. And I'm talking over the course of 10 years. My daughter's not someone who's just going to walk out of my life. So I know there's a risk of that when you're a parent. I realize that. And I know the fear, but pass. Thanks.
I'd like to ask a question. It feels like a paradox, the idea about attachment versus not being enmeshed and everything. Like, what's the balance? Do you feel like working the steps and practicing all these things has brought you to that, or was it like a complete psychic change? Like, what actually gets you to a place of having a balanced, thinking about others, thinking about yourself, staying in your own lane, but being attached to the people and the world around you?
Thanks for that question. My experience is what is written in the back of the big book in the chapter or appendix, actually, spiritual experience. They talk about most people not having a sudden dramatic change, that it's of the educational variety. And that's how I would describe my experience. It's been slow. It's been gradual. It's been, kind of one day at a time, 1 week at a time. Wasn't sudden. Was never dramatic. And still to this day, it's a slow practice. It's way too slow from my perspective. And I stopped drinking. I stopped sexually acting out. Name those dates, but just entirely stopping with codependent thinking and the emotions that go underneath that with regard to pleasing others and being afraid to lose a relationship or hurt a relationship or damage a relationship, those kinds of things. I just don't know how to identify the quit point, because fear, and particularly fear, is an instinct. It's not something that just leaves. It's a human condition. At least as the way as I know it and understand it, and really is written in the book even. Resentments are written as an instinct, fear is written as an instinct, sex is written as an instinct. So it's why it shows up in the 5th step, and it is part of being human. I don't think we completely cease having those feelings. It's what's more important is the turn, not to not feel the feelings, but to turn when our head gets started with the reaction and response to those feelings. It's just the best way I could put it. It's a great question. Thanks.
I have one more question, if we're still okay with time. I am curious, Dave, you had mentioned about being mindful of enabling in counseling settings. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts, given your time and experience in recovery, if you, obviously counselors have like their own trainings and various modalities and whatnot, but have you ever articulated for yourself what you maybe wish that counselors might incorporate from the big book? Or I don't know if I can even articulate this question as clearly, but I'm curious if through your experience in recovery, there's something that the big book has shown you that would be helpful even in a counseling setting.
Well,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think yes. I'll just tell you, I've done a lot of counseling. hundreds of counseling sessions. Remember, I just, it's a moot point now, but I didn't get divorced twice with no counseling. And I had lots of free counseling available to me because I had a employee assistance program, so I didn't have to pay for the counseling. What every one of those counselors, to my memory, did was enable me to be a victim to other people. So if I were to recommend anything, because as a sponsor, I don't participate with that, and I don't allow a sponsee to articulate that with me. I just don't. I literally say stop, at somewhere around the 6th or 7th sentence about blaming somebody else, or what does that look like? Describing what she's doing, what she's saying, most typically, or it could be a he, but often a she. And as soon as they do that, I'm like, that is not something that is going to be the least bit helpful. I won't participate in it. If that's what you want to do, you can, but it's going to have to be with somebody else. I'm pretty direct, pretty fast about that. In this program, we focus on our solution, and that solution is not blaming others. What's my recommendation for counselors, whether they're in program or not? Don't encourage or even participate with someone who is going into the long victim story. I've been with counselors who've allowed me to start with victim and end with victim for 45 minutes. I don't know what training they get that says they're supposed to do that, or if that's a good thing. I think the source, because I'm not just program, I've been in healthcare for 40 years. I think the source is, when you're in a counseling session with somebody, it's important that you preserve their self-esteem. It's important that you support them. It's important that you, allow them to share their feelings and not bring them down or put them down or make them feel worse about themselves. I don't know. I don't have professional training in counseling, but my guess is there's something along the way about that. I once had a counselor tell me that, because I was both in AA program recovery and in the counseling session, and I kind of called it out at that point. And this particular counselor said that back to me. She said, well, one of the things we as counselors are trying to do is help you with your self-esteem. Those were the words she used. So, but yeah, it's to be aware of how participating when someone is painting themselves as a victim by describing the third party who isn't there, to not participate that and to redirect towards, the only solution is going to be if you bring a different Dave to this relationship, because you're never going to be able to change party number 3. If party number 3 is your problem, you're never going to have a solution, right? I don't know. I had to get into 2 divorced failed marriages to see that the common denominator was Dave. It wasn't going to be to switch the other person. It was going to have to be how to change who I'm bringing to this. That's a hard question, Jacqueline. Thanks.
No, thanks for that. Appreciate it.
There any more questions for Dave?
I have one question. In a sponsee and sponsor relationship, as a sponsee, do you ever feel that you are under, or you are obligated to your sponsor to make a certain amount of step 10s a day, or respond a certain way in your nightly reviews?
My answer to that is no. I haven't been given instruction or direction as specific as that. I mentioned earlier, I think it was a question that Kashi had asked, you know, do you do a daily 10th step, etc. I have never been given instruction on specific frequency with regard to steps 10 and 11. What I read in the big book and what the sponsors have communicated to me is we watch for these, and when they crop up, then we take these actions. And the writers in the big book, when they wanted to be specific about timeframes, were. You know, the one thing that they do say in there is talk to someone else immediately. The only trouble with the word immediately is that in 1938, there were not cell phones, there wasn't email, there wasn't the kinds of immediate communication tools that we have today. So I don't know what they would have said because I don't know what they thought. But in 1938, immediately might have been within the next couple of days instead of holding on to it for weeks. Kind of, I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking exactly when they wrote that. But as soon as it's possible is what my sponsor says with me and what I tell my guys. And what that means is text Dave, say, I'd like to do a 10th step. Dave gets back to him, says, well, I'm available tomorrow night or Tuesday at noon or whatever. And that's when we talk. So it's not a daily thing. That's the best I can tell you from my practice.
Any other questions for Dave? Okay, we'll go ahead and close out the meeting and stop the recording. Thank you again so much for your service, Dave. That was so helpful and appreciate you. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.
Thank you, Nicole.